Now I'm going to go ahead and pin my circle here because we're going to be sewing the bottom half of this and leaving the notched side, so there's a little notch here, leaving the notch side open. It seems kind of counterintuitive, but that's okay. And remember, we always have our right sides together. Now we're going to take this and turn it inside out, but I always like to clip my ends here because I just find that I get a much crisper fold. So go ahead and clip right here and here. Sometimes I'll even cut this down. Now we're going to turn this inside out. And do a little understitching. As well as go ahead and iron this once we've done our understitching. So the point of understitching is to help hold your fold. It makes things lay flatter, they look neater, and if you ever really look at the construction of a suit or any garment that has lots of under construction, you'll notice that there are little straight stitches underneath collars and cuffs and things. It's all just to hold them in place. So what we're going to do is, it's not about being perfect. I'm going to open the seam, and my thread is going to match everything except for this color, which is okay because I'm only going to do like 1/4 of an inch stitch. So I'm going to start from the corner and then sew to the other corner and then iron. I'm making sure that I hold this open and flat so nothing bunches, especially when you're sewing near the corner. So I've gotten to the end, so this is where the other side of our collar, the straight side, and I'm just going to stop here, give a little back stitch, and go ahead and clip my threads, because again, this is really to hold it in place. This is not a construction point where we're going to hold the garment together. So now here's our understitch. So then we put the collar on, I'll know that my non-understitch side is my right side, and then this understitch side is now my wrong side. So this is the side that will go against the body. This is the side that we will see. And be sure to iron, because little points like this have to come popping out again, just like on this side. Now the next step is to baste your raw edge after you've ironed it. I don't know if you can tell that I've ironed it, but it's much flatter now. This Kenmore Old Lady doesn't really have that big of a stitch, a basting stitch. Some newer machines you can actually get like a 1/2 inch or almost an inch of a stitch, but because we're not using this as a gather and this stitch is about to get clipped anyways, this is really just to make sure that your collar remains as flat as possible and doesn't get bunched up in the sewing process, because essentially our next step, just like making the hat, we're going to take something that's rather straight and try to attach it to something that is already curved or circular, which fabric doesn't want to do that, so we're going to have to clip and ease in. So I'm going to go ahead and just quickly baste on the edge. I'm just going to do, basting stitches aren't supposed to be seen, so we don't want to put them at 5/8 inch because then they'll be competing with our actual sewing construction seam. So I usually do them 1/4 of an inch, sometimes 1/8 of an inch, whatever, or 3/8 of an inch, whatever is smaller than my actual seam allowance. And you also do not have to backstitch because, again, they're not construction seams. But you do want to make sure that everything is laying flat. Here's the marker where the edge of our collar is going to go. Now again, with right sides together, I want to do it like this. I want my base stitch to actually lay down because this collar doesn't flip up. It's a down collar. So now I'm going to put here to here. So here's the edge of the dot. Zoom in. And then here's the edge of the fabric. Pin. I'm going to pin here, and then I'm going to pin on the other side as well. Find the middle. It should be here. Here's the crease from that. So, see, that looks like the middle. I'm going to pin here and continue. And if I need easement, I'm going to go ahead and clip where I need it to make sure that these two curves, because look, we have a convex and a concave curve, and sometimes the only way to get these two curves to lay flat is to cut or to slash and spread. Usually it's this one that needs a little bit more room to ease up to the convex curve. Now, because I'm using this denim fabric and it has a little bit of lycra stretch to it, I was actually able to get it to fit these curves without, I'll show you the other side, without having to do any clipping. But that is not true for many projects that I've worked on. If you have to clip, just remember, do not clip beyond your 5/8 seam allowance, otherwise you will have a hole in your garment, and then we'll have to use up more space, which can alter and shift the fitting and how everything has to go together for your end project of your vest. So I'm going to go ahead and sew my collar on here at a 5/8 seam. And I will be back stitching because this is a forever seam. And always make sure you're paying attention to what's happening underneath. Make sure you're paying attention to what's happening underneath here. Sometimes when we're sewing along and like everything looks so great, especially because this is heavier than here, the under part may start jumbling up because the dog feeds that are actually pulling the fabric underneath will start moving this faster than up here, or like because this fabric has it's seamed together, sometimes the seams will get stuck and then the rest of it wants to go by, and then you have to go back and do what I refer to as river sewing, which is where it's a fancy way of saying you have to take out your seams and start over. No big deal, but it happens all the time. Sometimes if I have a problem seam where I'm sewing on top but it keeps jumbling on the bottom or it keeps coming out uneven, I will take it off. So I'll just decide, okay, this doesn't seem to want to work. Grab my scissors, cut the thread, and sew it from this side. Now you get a whole different perspective and you can see what's happening and what is causing the disruption of your flow. So I can sew this on either side, either way. Just make sure again that your seam is at 5/8 seam. And on my sewing machine, there are lines here, little lines that tell you 3/8, 5/8, 7/8. Pretty standard on most sewing machines, but I use it all the time. And unless I have some crazy big seam, that sometimes I'll actually take a piece of tape and mark it on either side of whatever I need. You know, this is your tool. Modify it as you need. All right, let's get going. I don't know if you noticed, but I tend to pull my fabric just a little bit. This helps, again, deter any bumps from happening, but it also makes sure that, like, remember we have a concave and a convex curve. So when you pull it, both of these curves tend to straighten out a little bit better, and the chances of your seam coming out prettier are much higher. And I know you shouldn't run over pins, but I tend to do them a lot when I'm working on these videos because I'm thinking about so many different things. But sometimes you have to run over pins if you're holding something important and you just pray you don't break a needle. But you break a needle, you change it, and you move on. So here it is, stitched on. It definitely needs a good press. And I decided to make my collar stripes go horizontal instead of vertical. I thought that would just be a nice little addition. If you look at on the back side, here's the seam. So you can go in with your iron and iron this flat. Now, because these are two different fabrics, sometimes for me to get this flat, I may have to increase the heat beyond what this fabric can take, and that's when you will want to use a pressing cloth, which is just a piece of cotton fabric. I've even used cut a square from an old t-shirt. It just needs to be big enough for all of your iron plate to, it has to be big enough to cover your iron plate. What it does, it just keeps your fabric from scorching or burning, because let me tell you, I have burnt many a lining in my day using a way too hot iron because the fabric I was using, some kind of heavy upholstery fabric for theater, and it was way too hot for my lining fabric, and then I had to start over because once you burn it, and I mean I burnt it, like burnt a hole through it. Once you burn it, there's no going back. There's no way to save scorched, burnt fabric. All right, let's go on to our next step. For our next step, step 8, we're going to take our front-facing pattern piece number 4, and we're going to stay stitch the fronts. Simple step. Again, stay stitching, we can use a regular stitch for that. All it does is it keeps the fabric from stretching too much. Things that are cut on the bias, so we have which is easy to see on stripes. So we have a straight of grain that's running up and down. So when I pull it this way, it doesn't want to move, right? And then we have another grain, the warp and the weft. So warp, weft. But what happens when we get into curves? The problem with curves, or not the problem, but the issue is that they bend and they stretch. Now, because I've used, and most of you most likely have used, iron-on interfacing, this stretching problem isn't going to be as big of a deal if you used a different type of interfacing that was sewn on, or no interfacing at all. So when we get to the bias is so think of this as a grid. So we have, what's our X, Y, X, Y, and then we have one going this way, diagonal. This diagonal creates a stretch. So this step is asking us to try to control the stretch a little bit, just by simply doing a straight stitch going down. Again, I do mine like 1/4 of an inch because I like to sew mine about 1/4 of an inch because I don't want it to get in the way of any other seams. Just essentially just disappear. You don't even have to backstitch with this. Now for step 10, we're going to need pattern piece number 5, which is our front lining. This pairs with the piece we just stay stitched here. Now you might not be able to see this on the camera because I wanted my chalk markings to be very faint so that you don't see them on the back side. But we have to once again do our darts for the front of our vest. And I'm going to fold this, sew it, and then open it using a pair of scissors and iron flat. That way we don't create a lot of bulk in our vest. And also, I have to change my thread color. I have to change my thread color to red. I've changed my thread color to red because I don't want big blue lines showing up like veins on my vest. So that happens a lot if you pick two different colors, which I did pick two different colors, going back and forth and changing threads. The simplest thing to do would have been to pick one color and stick with it. Blue vest front, blue vest back, but that's not that's not how we designers think. Now that we have stitched, slashed, and ironed, so it's very, very flat, almost can't even see it, we're going to put our right sides together with our lining front and the facing. This is when our notches become very vital to lining things up. So here's a notch, this is on like the neck part, and then here's the other notch. So I just go ahead and I start off with matching up my notches and pinning. And then from there I can figure out if I need to ease anything in down here. And usually you do. You see, again, we have a concave and convex shapes. So once again, I'm going to, it's like I like to pin what I know is true. So I know that these two ends need to meet, and I know that our notch needs to meet. And then everything else has to fit according to plan. Sometimes I will have to slash and spread whichever side isn't going to fit, which might be the denim side, because we've stay stitched it, and my fabric has this little like ridge that's running through, so that might cause a little bit of congestion. Kind of pinning and stretching, because I think it's going to fit. It just needs to be pulled a little bit. And then if it gets to where I'm like, this little one, maybe not, I can make a little snip. But again, be very careful. We don't want to rip our piece and have to start over. This little notch that I just made so we can lay flat is plenty. I'm always kind of trying to find the middle of things. It may look like my hands are kind of just moving haphazardly and adjusting things, but I'm really just looking for where's the middle of the middle. So that way I don't end up with a bunch of fabric on this side or a bunch of fabric on that side. And then up to the neck. Sometimes you have to sort of misshapen this side to get this to fit, but once you sew it, everything fits perfectly. So that's kind of a lot of pins. But pin as you need. Now I'm still on red. At this point it doesn't really matter what color you have, because it's going to be on the inside and there is red, but if you want to switch back to blue, because you know eventually we're going to get back to blue, go for it. You, as in I, would have to switch back to blue. I probably will finish this sewing on blue. Alright, so let's find our 5/8 seam and sew. Back stitch and continue. So let's call this step 10B. So this is what our, so this part goes here against the body on the inside. You can see the seam. See the seam on the back. So then I'm going to press this open and move on to the other side. For step 11, we're going to stay stitch the shoulder seam of the back. Again, stay stitching is just to keep it from stretching too much, because they're assuming that we're using a lining fabric, and their assumption is correct. I'm going to do mine at, again, just 1/4 inch to make it simple and easy, and so it doesn't get seen and no need to backstitch. Now for step 12, we're going to take our lining front shoulder with right side together, match it up with the back shoulder. Now again, the back is going to be a little bit bigger than our front. Let's go ahead and we can also match up our triangles. You can see that here. There's a triangle there. And there's a triangle here. I'm going to go ahead and match my triangles. Pin. My triangle here. This triangle is letting us know that there's supposed to be this excess. Now, when you're drafting or draping a pattern, you have to add this in because people's shoulders are naturally rounded or hunched or have different shape to them, and you need that extra little bit of ease. So I'm going to find the middle of this ease. Let's try that. And then when I pull it, if it goes straight, then I know that I'm pretty close on that side. If I pull it and it goes straight, then I'm pretty close on this side as well. I'm going to pin in the middle and then probably a few more pins. I also like to make sure that my seam is open on the front, as you can see here. So I want to make sure that this stays open and flat. That way we don't get any like notches and bunches on the collar seam. And probably one more pin here and here. Also, don't forget to match up the notch right there. Ta-da! Ta-da! And we sew. Back stitch. Continue. So once you've sewn your shoulder seams together, I ran out of red thread, so I finished mine in blue because I already had blue bobbins. It's okay, it's just one seam, and then I can restart. So you should, if you're looking from the wrong side, look something like this, which we will flip to the right side, and then they will look something like this. Step 12.